welcome once again to Sid Cordle Christian People's Alliance. Sid, you've had a Christmas, you've had a New Year, you've had a birthday, and you don't look a day over 90. I've got to say that.
Good.
Uh,
If
so
you
it's
said I
been
didn't look a day under 90, I'd be worried.
well, it's been a good time, I know, but there you go. Now, lots of people have mentioned that you've been part of their lives over this century nearly, and it's nice to look back when you're still alive. It was like a wake, but you were there in person, weren't you?
Yes, it's been awesome. I mean, the last few days, if people don't know, I was 70 on the 2nd of January. And I decided this time that I'd have two parties because when I was 60, we just had one party in London. And all my friends from Sheffield and people I'd known in the past weren't there. So this time I had two parties, one on the Friday, which was my birthday in Sheffield, which all my children came to, and my sons-in-law and my grandchildren, as well as all my friends from the past, including somebody there who knew me at university and people that knew me from years back. And then I had another party on Saturday, which was the day after my birthday, in Hitchin, which people from London came to, and people that had known me more recently, which was actually also very heartwarming. I mean, there's somebody there that only known me for 2 years that went up and gave tribute as to the impact I'd had on her life in the last 2 years, which was lovely, beautiful. But it was amazing, really, how people were able to tell stories of the impact it had on their lives, back, 50 years ago. In one party, and then at another party talking about the impact it had on their lives in the last 2 years. So it's like, I really felt very, very heartened by everything that people were saying. It was awesome.
I'll tell you one party that didn't turn up. That was the Labour Party.
Yes, the Labour Party weren't there, although there was one cousin which I was very disappointed in a sense that I fell out with because he couldn't cope with me supporting Donald Trump. And
Oh,
and when I said I supported Donald Trump, he just literally said, "I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it." And so he wouldn't actually let me discuss the advantages or disadvantages of Donald Trump. It was just like, I don't want to talk about it. And the result was, that we stopped talking altogether, which was very sad, really.
it is when it gets you that way, isn't it? But I'm afraid I've heard similar stories. We've got friends from all diversions,
Yeah,
left and right.
yeah.
But there is something I've got to say about the extremes in our civilization that is quite common. They don't want to know another way or discuss it. And really, there's not a lot you can do.
Well, I think the problem was in that particular instance, you see, he buys the Times newspaper every day, listens to the BBC, and believes everything that he reads and listens to, and doesn't listen to an alternative point of view.
Mm.
You see, if you're in that position where you think, oh, the Times tell me the truth, the BBC tell me the truth, and anyone who's giving me a different story is lying to me, that they don't understand what's going on, then it doesn't work.
Well, let's go into the deep end, Sid. And we mentioned the left and the right, and there's never been a bigger division again about Venezuela. And you know exactly what way they're going to vote, speak, or discuss it on whose terms. And there must be something in it because you've mentioned newspapers and BBC, Guardian, goodness knows, and they have their viewpoint, and so has the Daily Mail, etc. But in this, let's underline the fact newspapers have got to sell copy. The only thing that sells copy, I'm talking globally now, is bad news. Because the whole psychology of this, as we've mentioned on previous occasions, is they want you to read the story for a week. That's ideal to them because you keep buying the newspaper, listening to the news. And you will listen to the news if somebody tells you, oh, Greenland, Trump's going to take over Greenland without getting the full facts. Oh, we're in danger. World War III's on our doorstep. And that makes you watch the next installment of the news or buy the next newspaper. That's the psychology behind it. And I'll tell you what, that's a good example with Trump. And let's just bypass a second Venezuela and the news about Trump's going to take over Greenland. This is an absolute nonsense. What the mainstream media don't tell you is that there's been a international agreement, an accord for over 50 years about Greenland, and it's clearly stated that the States, Canada, and Denmark are permitted to put missiles, troops, and everything on Greenland to defend their own territory because it's such an important area that it possesses. Trump, I don't believe for 1 minute, but he plays games. We all know that. Poker. He knows that, and he knows at the nth degree that all the submarines from China and Russia that are patrolling Greenland waters, he's got the warning quite rightly. And if it comes to another Cuba, similar vintage, then there will be missiles put on Greenland, and Trump will have every right to do it under international law.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, I'm a big believer in the whole principle of self-determination, but you see, in this case, it's not absolutely straightforward because, like you say, there is an American base already on Greenland, so there's already American troops on Greenland. It's not as though they're talking about invading a country which they don't have any right to be on. So it's not straightforward. But equally, it's very clear that the Chinese and the Russians and goodness knows who else that has their eyes on true land has got far less rights than the US to be there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But it's by no means straightforward.
The left are already voted, of course, that Trump should not go into Venezuela because of international law. That again is got to be called to task, that view. In fact, the public have already voted in various polls, and they're supporting nearly 90% of the UK population are supporting what Trump's done. Listen to the news and the pundits, you wouldn't think that. You'd think, oh, he shouldn't be in there. But again, mainstream media, you have to do your own fact checking, Sid.
Well, yes, but you see, the interesting thing about Venezuela is that you see, Maduro was never elected. I mean, they have had elections of some sort there, but everyone believes that the elections have been false, have been rigged. And Britain has not recognised the Maduro government for that reason. And many countries internationally have not recognised Maduro as having a legitimate government. And his chief opposition has either been killed or sent into exile and fled the country. And that is typical of a dictator. So Maduro basically was a dictator, not a democratically elected ruler, and therefore had no legitimate right to rule Venezuela. And I was listening yesterday to GB News, and there was a Labour MP on there that was comparing Maduro to Zelensky. That is absolute nonsense. Zelensky was democratically elected as the leader of Ukraine, and Russia had no right whatsoever to invade Ukraine. That it was completely illegitimate invasion. What the US has done is not illegitimate because Maduro was an illegitimate leader. But that's beside the whole point about the drug trade that he was involved in, which was having a terrible effect on America. And they're basically saying that we had to take action to stop the drug trade, and we had to go to the person who was at the source, who was controlling it, in order to stop it. So that's the second argument which the US is putting forward. But this idea somehow that Maduro was a legitimate leader and they got no right to remove him, I'm afraid that is not true. And the other thing I would say, by the way, is that this whole argument of international law is actually extremely weak. You see, there's no actual, how can I put it, uh, a code of international law like we have a code of law in this country. So in this country, you have laws passed by Parliament that are then applied by the judiciary, and you have law is done on that basis. In many countries, including the United States, you have constitutions which then perform the fundamental basis for the laws of the nation. There is no international law that I can go and read and look up and say this is international law that is passed by some parliament, because there's no parliament and there's no constitution that undermines international law, underpins, sorry, I should say, international law. So the result of that is that you have judges in The Hague that make judgments based on their opinions, basically, not on any code of law. So it's very vague. And it so happens that these judges at the moment that are in The Hague are mostly socialists, so they're mostly left wing. So you get them making judgment, for instance, that Netanyahu and Gallant, the defense minister in Israel, should be arrested, for what? For defending themselves, supposedly. I mean, it's just utter nonsense. So international law has lost all credibility. It has no credibility whatsoever. So this whole idea is, oh, we have to uphold international law. It's frankly nonsense. There is no international law. It's just because people are, well, it's the United Nations basically that is pretending that they have legitimacy. The United Nations doesn't have legitimacy anymore. I mean, what they've done in Gaza is frankly supporting terrorism. They've been supporting terrorism all over the world. The United Nations lost its legitimacy.
Absolutely, it has. And it's trying to influence everybody into LGBT ways and
Mm,
other ways, abortion ways. The
yeah.
United Nations is diabolical at the moment. Whether it will ever recover, who knows? Whether it will be replaced by another body, one can only hope so. One thing that sort of gels my mind a bit, Sid, is this comparison between Zelensky and Maduro. You're absolutely right. And I get frustrated sometimes with the person asking the question, the anchor, the guy or the gal who's holding the program together. And you think, why didn't they jump in on something like that and say that's nonsense? You
Yes.
can't back it up. And then I think back and look at what is happening. And it's not the easiest position to be in, an anchor on a program. You've got people whispering in your ear from the gallery, oh, you've got to go to the weather. You've got 30 seconds left to do this, that, and the other. It's a very skilled job. And often people that occupy these positions get attacked unfairly. So bear that in mind. Shout at the telly. That's what I do. That's the best way of getting around that problem.
It's quite interesting. Sometimes on GB News, they always have a somebody on the left there, which is basically because that's an Ofcom requirement, I believe. So you normally have someone on the left and then someone on the right
Yeah.
on the program, and then you have someone sat in the middle who's supposed to be chairing it. But sometimes the chair, if they're weak, doesn't say anything. So you literally have the person on the left and the person on the right arguing among themselves and just talking like crazy, and the chair's just quiet, which is not very good, frankly.
No, it is difficult. That's why I mentioned that caveat. But when you see a poll and 90% of the population of Britain believe that Trump was right to go into Venezuela, and then when you see 50% of two commentators from different angles because of Ofcom again, then you think, oh, half the country believes that, the other half believes in the other. Not correct.
Yeah.
And we'll come on to that perhaps a little bit later when we discuss Brexit. But staying at the moment with the Venezuela situation, I'll tell you what really has got me mad, and that's the wimp that calls himself Sir Keir and leads our country. He's a complete flip-flop wimp. And to come out and first thing he said when this blew up, I didn't know anything about it. Well, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't have said anything if I was Trump to you, especially. And then he goes on about cutting through to what I'm saying, Sid. Basically, it is absolutely confirmed from this debacle that he is no longer running the party. It's the left wingers that are running the party. We have got a neo Marxist government in Britain, and it's awful, and he's got to go.
Well, yeah, I partly agree with you, partly don't. But I mean, I think what we have, frankly, is an extremely weak government because Starmer couldn't make up his mind as to what to say about Venezuela. And he's like, "Oh, I wasn't told." It's like the barrister who's not been briefed. It's like I wasn't told. I don't know. I've not been briefed on this situation. I can't comment. It's like and then it takes him a couple days basically to to establish what his view should be. The problem is he's got no principles on which to work. And the problem that he faced with Venezuela is that there are a load of Labour MPs that think, oh, it's terrible what Trump has done. And interestingly enough, that is the approach that France has taken. And apparently in the Security Council, where they've already debated it, France was very anti-Trump, strongly anti-Trump, which which certainly Britain wasn't. Britain just basically said we've got to comply with international law, but we don't believe that the government of Venezuela was legitimate, which is. I mean, as I already said, all this talk about international law is nonsense, but at least they said that the government of Venezuela wasn't legitimate.
No,
So
but don't forget, Sid Macron certainly took Trump's side far more than Starmer.
well, in the Security Council, he didn't, or France didn't. In the Security Council, they were scathing of Trump. They were strongly anti-Trump. They
Oh,
basically
yeah,
said he got no right at all.
that's true. But at least Macron cut through that on a personal basis, maybe.
Okay, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Well, in that case, then the French government's in total chaos, which we do know anyway, because they can't actually appoint a prime minister that has the support of the majority of parliament. So the French government then is in that case is all over the place. But if we come back to the British government, you see the thing with Starmer is that he's so weak. He's got to basically consult everybody and find out what their opinion is before he can actually come up and tell us what his opinion is. Because if he comes out immediately and says, "Oh, yeah, this is right," the United States had every right to do that, he then finds his backbenchers are up in arms and don't support him. So he's like, he would then have to backtrack. So instead of that, he just says, "I don't know what my opinion is yet because I've not yet been briefed," which is so weak.
Yes,
But we now have a very, very weak prime minister who can be pushed around, and I don't think that the left automatically control the government, but the left certainly have a very strong say in what goes on in the Labour Party at the moment, and Keir Starmer is scared of offending them. That's the reality.
well, you'll have to convince me, Sid, because I tell you what, in Spain here, the very similar thing is going on. We've had a lefter than British government, would you believe,
Yeah.
here under Pedro Sanchez since 2018. So we're talking 7-ish years. And it's been an utter disaster. They're about to be given the Spanish archer, the elbow, the next election. They've already last month won Extremadura, which is a big part of Spain in the northwest. And people have had enough, like they have in Britain. But listen to this lot. Spanish government increased in taxes over that period, 513 billion. Now think of UK, exactly the same here in proportion to the length of time, certainly, that Starmer's been in power. Massive overtaxation. Public debt has increased by 507 billion. In other words, they've got it in and paid it out to unworthy causes. Exactly the same thing that's happened in Britain. It's going to people who don't need it. Oh, I've got a headache. I've got constipation. Whatever it is, I'm staying on my sofa today and claiming benefits. Same in Spain. Less generous in Spain, one has to admit it, but the same. The increases are being felt by the general public. And all we're told by our leaders in Spain, we must maintain our solidarity taxes. Now, that is Marxist language, and it comes to the surface, certainly in Spain. Solidarity. It's like listening to an extremely left-wing trade union in Britain, based on the same communist principles. So we're all in it together. Where have we heard that phrases before? Yes, right. What it means in total, and they've just published recent figures, the poor get poorer under socialism, the rich get richer. The rich have had a 10% increase in spendable income. The poor, it's minus 2%. And it's standard, well, fair for every socialist government. When it reaches the extreme of Venezuela, you think, wow, somebody's got to step in here, and Trump has done just that. Socialism as we have it is not the good socialism that it started off with originally.
Yes. No, see, if people don't understand, see, obviously Venezuela's been talked about a lot at the moment. See, Chavez was elected as leader of Venezuela, but he was a communist elected as a leader. But after he was elected, he started spending like crazy, spending on everything. And then, of course, the oil price went down, and Venezuela was very dependent on oil. But when the oil price went down, you see, instead of doing what they should have done, which cut back the spending because we've now got less money, they just carried on spending. And the result of just carrying on spending was debt greatly increased, and then inflation started increasing. Inflation went up to over 1,000% in Venezuela. So the whole economy was completely undermined. So what then happened was that the health service collapsed, and there wasn't enough food for the people in the shops because they couldn't buy it anymore because of inflation. So you actually had people literally killing animals in the fields in order to live. I mean, it was just phenomenal. The whole economy collapsed. And that's when they resorted to drug trafficking in order to make money. I mean, so the whole situation also became completely corrupt. So you see, this is typical of socialism. So what happens is that they just spend, spend, spend. See, I heard somebody else also say on television yesterday, when under Chavez, Venezuela was doing very well. Well, it was to begin with because he was just spending like crazy. But he was causing all the problems up the line, because the spending couldn't continue. So he was creating problems for the future by spending like crazy. And that's typical of socialism. They just spend, 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 but they don't realise that mounting up debt, only lasts for a period of time. And there's problems going to be caused down the line. You see, actually, one of Margaret Thatcher's sayings was the problem with socialism is that in the end, they run out of other people's money, which they're spending. And that is precisely it. They run out of money. So when they run out of money, what do? Oh, we can't have austerity. Austerity will be terrible, so we just got to carry on spending. And then they carry on piling up debt. They cause massive inflation. And then what do? Well, you see, in the 1970s, we ended up in 1976 going to the International Monetary Fund to bail the country out. And when we went to the International Monetary Fund, they then imposed spending cuts on the government. And when they imposed spending cuts on the government, what then happened was that the economy started to improve. So actually, by 1979, there had been significant improvements in the economy only because the Labour government had been forced by the International Monetary Fund to change tack. Now that didn't happen in Venezuela. There was no International Monetary Fund bailout that they then obeyed what they did. They just ignored all the consequences of what they were doing. So then you had the disaster. Now, what's going on in this country right now is the beginning of that process, when inflation is spiraling out of control. But we're in the beginning of that process.
Yep, cautionary tale there said. Another cautionary tale, of course, is the £13 billion that Mr. Miliband's decided to spend on energy heat pumps. Isn't 13 billion approximately half a black hole in current currency terms? And he's just got his own way. It's madness. But they continually pour money, good after bad, unproven science. That's exactly where we are with this so-called global warming madness. And there you are, half a black hole going on heat pumps, which for many people don't work even and are very expensive. I just throw that one in as a light relief before we actually go to an alternative to the chaos, and that's supposed to be reform. Now, the Tories and Labour are having a go a long time pre-election. Let's hope it's not a long time pre-election, but it could be 3.5 years. It could be next year, according to some pundits. But whatever the time, have reform got the time to get the act together? Now, that's been in serious doubt, so maybe the Tories and Labour are right. Who've they got? Well, they've got Danny Kruber, and they couldn't have got anybody better than he for organising. Also, they've had a massive donation, and with that money, they put it to good effect. They've opened this brand new centre in London, media centre, a platform to get things going, and they're attracting a lot of interest. So that's a good step forward. But will they get enough MPs with enough gravitas, with enough experience, and not finish up by Labour problems coming straight from university, being an MP with no experience, and look where we are?
Yes, you see, reform at the moment are not yet ready for government. And to me, this was emphasised when Nigel Farage suddenly announced if we were in power now, we wouldn't be able to cut taxes because there wouldn't be enough money. Now, that to me, that shows he's not thought through his policies, because the Reform Manifesto said very clearly that they would be cutting taxes. Uh, but you see, they haven't really established properly where they're getting the money from. So where they're getting the money from should be from cutting quangos, which we spend 353 billion a year on, which is just absolutely ridiculous. So what they should be doing is identifying all the quangos they don't need, which will include all the environment quangos, by the way, the net zero quango and so on and so forth, which there's loads of them. We set up 7 new environment quangos since Labour came into office. We should just did get rid of them all. Now, reform should have a policy of saying we're going to get rid of all these quangos. We'll no longer fund them. And, they should have a list of all the quangos that the day they come into office, they'll stop funding. And this will then give them the money to cut taxes. So you see, because they've not yet thought through their policies, they don't really know what they're going to do. They're not ready for government. Now, Danny Kruger himself needs to get his head round what they're going to do day one, because that's his job. His job is to basically say what we're going to do day one. But they need to have a comprehensive manifesto. And they also need to be able to control the civil service. Because the reason why the Conservative government got into such a mess over the last few years was that instead of instructing the civil service, they were controlled by the civil service. Now, you see, I think you see this most dramatically, for instance, in the situation we had with Latif. You see, he's come, he was actually based in Egypt, a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, imprisoned in Egypt because of his extremist statements, but he had a mother in Britain, and on the basis of having a mother in Britain, he claimed British citizenship. Although he was living in Egypt, he was never actually living in Britain. But the Home Office gave him British citizenship, even though he was an Islamic extremist. And you think, well, at the time, Priti Patel was the Home Secretary. You think, well, why didn't Priti Patel stop it? Well, the Civil Service probably never even told her about that case. You see, this is the problem. You've got 50,000 people employed by the Home Office, and the minister can't know about every decision unless they're told and they're briefed. But afterwards, she should have been going berserk. The fact that she hadn't been told about this case, and what tends to happen is that unless you have a very strong minister, the civil service is just running the government and making the decisions, and they're not even telling the minister most of the decisions they're making. Now, unless reform come in and literally make sure that they've got the correct people in the civil service. I mean, they might well have to dismiss large parts of the civil service and basically say, I'm sorry, but we no longer want you running the government. And it may be very, very difficult because you then have civil service unions coming along and taking them to court. That process may well be going on. It's a difficult process, but they need to get to grips with what they've got to do. And they need to get to grips now with what they're going to do when they get into power and what policies they're going to implement. They need a very clear manifesto, very clear proposals of what they're going to do, and get into power and do it, no matter what happens.
That's interesting, Sid, and it's also interesting because more facts are coming out about the civil service. There's 6.2 million of them now. That's been increased drastically with this present government for obvious reasons. The big deck chair rearrangement has gone on, and again, snipping things around the edges, call it what you like. It has been announced that this year they'll be sacking 6,000 to 7,000 civil servants because they are not up to the job. So we're making the civil service, say Labour, more efficient. Again, rubbish window dressing. If you go to any company, they'll get rid of far more people than that in the normal course of events. That is an extremely low number when you compare it with 6.2 million being employed, believe you me. But that is how things are misrepresented again by these so-called spin doctors.
But the reality of what this Labour government will be doing is that 6 or 7 thousand that they're getting rid of are people that basically support the Conservative Party or don't support socialist principles. And they'll be getting rid of them and bringing in people that are basically socialists into the civil service. They'll be trying now desperately to make it almost impossible for reform to put their policies in place because the people running the civil service will be all left wingers. That's what the 6 or 7 thousand they're getting rid of will be. They'll pretend it's efficiency, it's efficiency driving. It won't be efficiency driving at all. It'll just be a political move. That's what they do.
And can we tell the public, if you don't believe a word that Sid is saying, or even I'm saying, just watch 30-year-old programs called Minister or Yes, Prime Minister, and you will see exactly what goes on. No wonder Margaret Thatcher said she was a real fan, because that was the reality. Wow, it's more than reality at the moment. Pundits are gathering together from various political hues and actually agreeing on the economics and where we are in Britain as a country. Reeves and Starmer are destroying the country. They're taxing the rich, which is the usual socialist principle. They're not keeping them in the country. They're losing thousands and thousands every year of good jobs because the leaders of these industries are going abroad. The Tories are not doing much better. Strangely, they're following the precepts of Gordon Brown in many things. Now, the only thing Gordon Brown did, of course, was keep us out of the euro. But to counteract that, he sold all our gold for nuppence. And the Tories still follow his, well, diktats. So they can't boast of anything. 2027, as I've mentioned this morning before, is the deadline, many people believe, of saving the country. If this lot are in power till 2029, it will be too late. But one thing everybody agrees on, and that you will probably agree on in one form or another, Sid, how do we sort it out? Well, there's three things that are very important that everybody mentions. Number one, we need growth. Number one. Number two, we need to privatise any state-owned industry that benefits by privatisation. And number three, we've got to spend some capital and get good projects going. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, you see, but the way you get growth is by cutting revenue spending. So you cut government day-to-day government spending, increasing capital spending, and cutting taxes. That is the recipe for getting growth. Now, this current government is doing exactly the opposite. So they are increasing revenue spending. I mean, they've spent an extra 85 billion on the quangos. That's where a lot of it's going. But some of it is also going in the National Health Service. They've increased spending on the National Health Service by about 30 billion, but with no reform of the health service, just putting more money into it. They're not actually achieving very much. You see, what we need is reform of the GP system, which is our policy. And if you reform the GP system, then you can solve a lot of the problems of the NHS. But they're doing no reform, they're just putting money in. But you see, what I've told you already is an extra over 100 billion in spending. They've cut capital spending because we haven't got enough money for the capital spending programme and increased taxes. So these are policies for recession. You see, the policies for reform, for growth, are what I've said. And it may not happen immediately, but over time, you'll see drastic improvements in the economy. Now, the other thing I should say, by the way, is that the Labour Party have also increased debt enormously. The debt has gone up by something like 40 billion pounds since that's per year since they've come into office. Now, if you're increasing debt enormously, you're spending an extra 40 billion, you ought to have growth because you're borrowing an extra 40 billion. So there's an extra 40 billion gone into the economy. So the fact that we haven't got any growth while borrowing an extra 40 billion a year shows that the policies are a complete disaster for the long term. Because if the opposite was happening, that we were actually reducing debt, and there was less money going to the economy, but we were still getting growth, then that would be fantastic for the longer term. So the way we're going is completely wrong. And we need drastic changes in order to get the economy back going in the right direction. And this is what reform need to identify. They need to identify where they're going to cut spending in order to increase capital spending and cut taxes. And if they put that policy forward, that's the policy that will solve the problems in the country.
Should we look to Mr. Trump? End of year speech he's made. And he seems to have got it right. Number one, he stopped immigration. And when I mean stopped, zero immigration. Never mind whether it's over the sea or whether it's over land. He's managed to stop it. he's number two, managed to create decent wage rises. Now, that's linked to immigration as well, because he's decided to highlight the fact that there's no more black labour, cheap labour coming into the country, people working for Deliveroo that should never be allowed in any country. And of course, by giving it to the genuine indigenous workers, yes, companies have had to pay a bit more, but it's worth it. It works. He's lowered inflation. Now, just compare all what I'm saying to what the present Labour government. He's got, and this is startling, out of the 10 peacemaker deals that are available to him, he's actually completed on 8 of them. Yes, some of them are fairly minor, and the big ones or twos remain to be done. But he's even managed to do that. And what's Mr. Starmer done with his time? Well, exactly the opposite in both political, economic, and any other terms.
Well, yes. You see, well, what I said, that the right approach to the economy in order to get growth is basically exactly what Trump has done. He's been cutting revenue spending, he's been increasing capital spending, and he's been cutting taxes, and he's cut taxes quite drastically. He's actually gone a long way down that road, and the result is that the United States, despite, you've said that they've stopped immigration. They've not only stopped immigration, they've also managed to exit their country one way or another, 2.5 million illegal immigrants. So they've got 2.5 million people less that they've sent back that Biden allowed in. Now, on that basis, you would think that there will be less money in the economy, but they've actually got more money in the economy. They've got growth, which is more that their yearly growth now is above 2% in the United States. Ours is now about 1.1%. So our growth is significantly lower while increasing debt. Their growth is a lot higher while reducing debt and reducing the number of people in the country. Which is a phenomenal achievement, frankly. So yes, Trump is doing brilliantly. And the end result of that, by the way, is that the last opinion poll I saw for Insider Advantage gave him net +9. So he got 50% favourable, 41% opposed. And compare that with Starmer, who has something like -52. So he has 18% support him, and 70% say that he's pursuing the wrong policies. So he's -52, while Trump is +9. That is the result of Trump pursuing the right policies and Starmer pursuing the wrong policies for the country.
But ideological means, of course. Anyway, we said we got to move on to our last spot, which is our footy spot, and maybe the politicians can learn something from football because they are parallel. Now, we've made accusations on this programme about overpaid footballers, overpaid this, and you can't argue about the Amarin saga. And I'm sorry to be proven right, but you must admit that I have been over the 40 months of his tenure. Day one, I said he's not the right guy, and he's not got the experience dealing with one club in Portugal that you need for a Premiership manager. He stuck to his ways, and not people say, well, good on him. No, he's been proved utterly and completely wrong by almost anybody in the industry, and eventually it's caught up with him. But at what cost, Sid? And let's analyse this. £27 million has been spent on clearly a failure from day one. He gave them due diligence to him, if you wish, an opportunity to get rid of him. He lost the Europa Cup, and they could have said, oh, right, you're going for nothing. They've had to pay eventually 10 million. It's perhaps the only job, although I can think of one other where you can be an absolute failure for your whole tenure and make a mess of it and come out with £10 million. No wonder he was seen walking with his wife through the snow in the leafy glades of Cheshire with a big smile on his face. Job done, some people say. But looking at it a little bit deeper, how about this, Sid? Too much money in clubs, where's it going to? Well, how many management do you need? United, Manchester, like many other clubs, have for some reason got directors of football, directors of every under 18, under 15, under 21, or whatever. And they're all pulling their own swing. And it's like a big committee. It's a nightmare. You cannot conduct certain things by committee. You've got to be a Ferguson, Alex, Sir dictatorship to make it work. He used to go round the club every day singing. He used to sing to the tea ladies. He used to sing on his round saying, I want this, I want that, you do it my way. So it was pleasant and good fun, but you've got one man, if you like, a dictatorship. But it worked, whereas the system at the moment said, too much money, who should we give it to? Oh, we'll give it to this director of football. We'll create a position that's not really needed. Fascinating. Are you going to be a club manager? No, you're 70, but you're not too late yet.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You see, I think it's incredible what Chelsea have just done, frankly. I mean, they've got rid of their manager and they bought it, and they said they're bringing in Rosinha. Rosinha was sacked by Hull City because they were at the bottom of the championship not long ago. I mean, he's now gone to Strasbourg. He's done okay at Strasbourg, but they said, oh well, he's done very well with youth. So Chelsea's a young team, so we're going to bring in a manager that's done well with youth. I mean, he's got no track record really of being a good manager. But if you look at the people that are doing well, Arteta, Guardiola, Emery, Arsenal, Manchester City, Aston Villa, these people have got a very particular style of football that they are committed to, that they play, that works, and they instill their style of football into the club and make sure everyone knows it. And they have a very good ethic and a very strong ethos within the club that works. You see, Manchester City last season went through a bit of a difficult patch, but even though they went through a difficult patch, they still managed to come through it. And basically, the club is succeeding again because they've got such a good manager. And, it is possible for a good manager to run the club and do well. And I think, by the way, that Frank will do well at Spurs, even though he's not gone, particularly well initially. He's still got, he knows what sort of football he wants played, and he's putting his ideas forward. And Alex Ferguson, who you mentioned, didn't do well when he first came to Manchester United from Aberdeen, and it looked as though he was going to be sacked. But they decided to stick with him, and fortunately, they stuck with him long enough for his ethics to come through and be shown to work. And I think managers do need to be given a time, but you need to know that the manager is putting the club in a certain direction, that he's working and that he's going in time to produce the goods. And that certainly, as you say, wasn't happening with Amorim. That's why they were right to get rid of him. But they need to bring in a manager that knows what they're doing, frankly.
Indeed, we need to bring in a prime minister who knows what they're doing. And Sid, we've sorted out politics, economics, and even Manchester United. We are to be congratulated today. Thank you so much. We'll see you very shortly.
Thank you.